I'd like to give a shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for continuing to support my channel. Hey everybody, this is Matt from Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, and today I am going to be going over all of the fantasy books that I plan on reading in the year 2023. There's a lot of them. On my list I have 103, which seems like a lot. It is. But this is actually less than I normally read. This year, for example, I'm probably going to end up at around 115, but some of these books that I plan on reading are absolute chunkers. So we'll see. You know, it's not going to go exactly like this, but it's going to go pretty close. And I say that because, you know, I like to be optimistic in that I will read an entire series, but undoubtedly some of these books I'm going to read and I'm going to say, this series is not for me. So I'm going to bow out and I'm going to enter something else. And further, maybe there's some new books that come out that I'm really excited about reading that are not on my radar yet. So I would say that probably a good 90% of the books that I'm going to say right now end up going to be read by me this year, and hopefully even higher. I'm pretty OCD about what I read and when, so I bet I'm going to be pretty eerily close here. So let's start off with the group that I like to call the top priorities. And in this list is going to be a bunch of books from series that I really want to wrap up, or books that have been on my TBR for so long that I'm just dying to read them. These are books that I kind of thought that I was going to be able to read by the end of this year, but they've just been on my list for like over a year, and I really need to get them banged out. So these are all going to be in alphabetical order, and we're going to start with Babel, or The Necessity of Violence. I think it's got a much longer title, but that's what I'm sticking to. This is just one book. I'm not even sure if it's going to be a series, but I know it came out recently, so there's only one book here. And this is by R.F. Kuang. And I didn't love the other R.F. Kuang books that I read. Is it Kuang or Kuang? I'm going with Kuang. And that was the Poppy War. And man, I liked the first book, disliked the second, and absolutely hated the third. But I still feel like there's a lot of promise there from this author. I don't know much about this series or this book. I know that it involves like a magic school, and I am kind of a sucker for that. And we'll see. You know, so many people have told me this is amazing. I have heard some very negative reviews of this, but I am holding out hope that I'm really going to like this book. Next up is a series. I think it's 2 books. I know a third one's planned, I think, for next year, and that is Between Earth and Sky. This is by Rebecca Roanhorse. And yeah, another one that I am very excited to read. I think, if I remember right, that this is a pre-Columbian fantasy story, and that really appeals to me. I mean, I don't think I've ever read a fantasy book that dealt with that as the central premise of the story. I think I read that there's like some political intrigue here, which I love. I work in politics. I love it when that is executed well. And yeah, so that's up on the priority list. Next is going to be Discworld Snuff. And I think this is the last Discworld book that I plan on reading. It's not the last Discworld book, but there is another one. I think it's like Raising Steam, but Terry Pratchett had, I think he had Alzheimer's and really started to show by this book in the series. I've heard some weird things about this book, but you know, Alan from Library of Alexandria, I was talking to him recently, and I told him that I wasn't planning on reading this one. He said, you have to do it, Matt. You've got to do it. It's a great book. It's even better than some of the earlier books. And so I'm giving it a shot. I'm doing it for Alan. But then I'm done. I'll have done all of the Discworld books that I plan on reading, and I think I've read like over 40 of them. So I'm excited to get to that point in my journey. Next up is a reread, the only book that I plan on rereading this year. I think 2024 is going to be the year of rereads, but not 2023. And this is Kingkiller Chronicle, The Wise Man's Fear. This is, of course, by Patrick Rothfuss. And I don't know what to think of these books. When I first read them, I loved them. But they were also like the second fantasy series that I'd read when I got back into fantasy. But I loved them. I have such positive memories because I read these books while I was on my honeymoon, which I have extremely positive memories of. and I loved them. So I picked up the 10th anniversary version, and don't even get me started that we have a 10th anniversary version for books that are probably never going to get a third book coming out. But when I read the first Kingkiller Chronicle book again, you know, I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as the first time I read it. And I recall thinking that Wise Man's Fear was a big downgrade from the first one while I still liked it. So my guess is that I'm not going to be obsessed with this book. And I was kind of holding out hope that Wise Man's Fear was going to get a 10th anniversary version, because that is a beautiful book with like these amazing pictures. I love anniversary editions of books, but I don't know that that one's ever going to come out either, because again, don't get me started on Patrick Rothfuss. He is taking his time, and good for him. Do your thing, Patrick. But I am just going to read this book on Kindle and see what I think. Then I have 2 more books in the Lonesome Dove series to review. I don't remember the name of them, but I think they're prequel series. So I reviewed Lonesome Dove, the first one, and I said kind of boldly that it's my second favorite my second favorite book of all time. It's a Western book. It's by Larry McMurtry. My first, of course, being the last book in Malazan, Book of the Fallen, The Crippled God. And I ended up reading the second book in this 4-book series, which takes place after Lonesome Dove, and I have not I have not released that review yet, but I will be doing that soon, so you'll get to know my thoughts. But spoiler alert, it is not as good as the first one, but still a good book. Then I will be reading a book that I'm currently reading, but I don't think I'm going to be able to finish it by the end of this year, so I'm including it on the 2023 list. And this is Mother of Learning, the Arc 3. The series is divided into 3 different very large arcs, and this one's enormous. It's by Domagoj Kurmaic. I forget, I slopped that one up. And this is a time loop story that I am digging so much. The writing quality, not great. Everything else about it, the plot, the pacing, just beautifully done, and I am just absolutely hooked on this series, and I cannot wait to find out how it finishes. I am also going to be reading the 4 Secret Books by Brandon Sanderson. 4 books that I know virtually nothing about. I like to keep in the dark on these things, especially for somebody like Sanderson, an author that I very much like. Even though I hated The Lost Metal, I love Brandon Sanderson, and I want to go into these books virtually blind. I know a very tiny bit about them, but I wouldn't be able to tell you like which book's which. So I'm going to go in with that in my mind of being kind of clueless, and I'm looking forward to it. I am also going to be reading Tales of Tremaine, the first binding. This is by R.R. Virdi, a book that I am kind of losing faith in. A booktuber that I thoroughly love, Ben from Genghis Khan, and if you are not subscribed to his channel, do so. He is awesome. He's probably the booktuber that my views most align with, and he hated it. And so if he hates it, I feel like the best I'm gonna do is think it's okay. But I mean, there's some other booktubers that I agree mostly with, loved it. So sorry, Ben, I'm hoping dearly that I disagree with you on this one. I also plan on reading The Bound and the Broken. This is by Ryan Cahill. It's a 2-book series. I think there's more coming out, but I think 2 books are out so far. I don't know a lot about this one other than a lot of things that I like. This is, I think, an epic fantasy. It's by a not super well-known author. I love these self-published authors that are not enormous, and everybody keeps telling me that I need to read The Bound and the Broken. This is one of the most books that I'm looking the most forward to reading out of the books that I haven't started the series yet. So yeah, very much looking forward to this, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to like it based on the little bit that I know about it and the people that tell me good things about it. Then it's The Lot Lands. This is by Jonathan French. This is a 3-book series, and I don't remember which series people told me that if I liked this, then try this. But what I've heard about this book is that it can be lighthearted, but also dark, like grim dark fantasy. I am a sucker for grimdark fantasy. I'm a sucker for a lot of things, but grimdark is high up on that list of things that I just cannot get enough of. It looks wonderful. The covers look really fascinating. Check it out over here. And And yeah, we'll see. This is, 3 books, and highly optimistic that I'm going to love these things. Then it is The Siege. This is a 3-book series by K.J. Parker. I think the first one's called 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City. And I've heard kind of mostly negative things about this, but it still intrigues me. It's kind of got this historical aspect to it, while fantasy. And I don't know. It just... I don't know why I'm reading this, quite frankly, because so many people have told me this series is just not good. But it's just kind of like calling out to me. Does that ever happen to you? It certainly happens to me, and I'm going for it. Then is the final book in the Tide Child trilogy. This is The Bone Ship's Wake by R.J. Barker. And I cannot say enough positive things about the first 2 books in the series. They are both top tier 5 out of 5 for me, and every single person that I know that has read this series has told me that the last book is the best of the bunch. And for me, that second book is like a top 10 all-time fantasy book for me. So I am stoked to be able to finally read the last book in the series. And I don't know where all of this list is going to go, but I know and committing that I'm going to read this one in January. I have a lot also of The Wandering Inn to read. This is by Pirateaba. I've been a huge cheerleader for this series. It is an online web serial that's being converted into book form. I've read 3 of the books. They're all 5 out of 5s for me. I love dearly this series. And I have 5 more to go on books that are already released. I believe the plan is 2 of these books are going to come out a year. So I really want to catch up so that I can then read them as they come out. Now, by the time I catch up, there's probably 10 times more content out there if I wanted to read the web version. I don't. I like reading on my Kindle. I'm happy to pay for these books even though they're free online. But I just need to catch up so that I can get this weight off my shoulders. It is a heavy weight that I am desperate to kick off. Finally, the last book on my top priority list is Warformed Stormreaver, The Iron Prince. I think Warformed Stormreaver is the series name, but it's only 1 book out so far. This is by 2 authors, Bryce O'Connor and Luke Chmilenko, I think it is. And this is another one where the rating on Goodreads, even though there aren't a lot of ratings, is like sky high. I think it's like the highest rated book on this entire list. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy around whether you should trust Goodreads ratings. I don't think that you should trust them inherently, but personally, I find when it comes to fantasy, that in general, the higher the review, the more likely I am to like it. Now, there's a ton of exceptions to what I just said. Especially when it comes to subgenres that I'm not into. But I think this is more of a progression fantasy. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of progression fantasy. I don't think I've ever read a progression fantasy that I didn't like. So to have one that is universally loved by the fantasy community, I know with enormous confidence that I'm also going to love this one. Okay, so the next group of books that I'm going to be talking about are the books that are coming out in 2023. Mostly these are books that I'm already caught up with the series and I'm just waiting for the next one to come out. So again, alphabetical order, and we're starting with Cradle, Waybound. This is the final book in Cradle. I think it's book number 12, it might be book number 13, but this is by Will Wight. And Cradle is always gonna go down as one of my favorite fantasy kind of sci-fi series of all time. I love it. It's a progression fantasy. I love those. It's kind of lighter in tone. I've loved virtually all of the books. Now the bad thing is I did not love the last book that came out, the second to last book in the series, and that's made me very worried for the final book in the series and how this series is going to stick the landing. I didn't hate it. I gave it a 3 out of 5, but for a series that has mostly gotten 5 out of 5 for me, it's very concerning. But still, I'm in love with the series. I will recommend it to everybody. I am crossing my fingers that it turns it around for the final book. I am also going to read Empire of the Vampire #2. This is by Jay Kristoff. It has not officially been confirmed to come out in 2023, but I've read some things that made it seem like it is. And I just loved this first book so much, and it really shocked me because I'm not a vampire genre type of reader. I don't like that at all. It's so boring to me. But man, I thought this series was wonderful. It's my first book that I've ever read by Jay Kristoff, and I look forward to reading more Jay Kristoff books, and you're going to hear his name come up later on in this video. I am also going to read Gods of the Weirdwood. I don't know how to say it. It's W-Y-R-D Wood. And this is by R.J. Barker. I have not read anything about this series. I couldn't tell you anything about it other than it's written by R.J. Barker. And R.J. Barker is the creator of The Tide Child, what I've just talked about and praised as much as I can praise it. And I have full faith that R.J. Barker is a wonderful writer. And so I will read and gobble up anything he puts out. And I'm looking forward to this one. I'm also going to read the 2 𝐒𝐤𝐽 books that are going to come out. These are by Travis Riddle. I don't think anybody that's watching this video have actually read these books because they don't have very many reviews online at all. But these are like a Pokemon-inspired fantasy series that's just fun. I love Pokemon as a kid. I haven't played it since I was a kid, but you know, I've always been really interested in that game and that kind of that world. And this is just taking everything about that and making it even more fun in a really small fantasy books. And yeah, they're just so fun to read. I think I've given them both like 4 scores, but they're just a joy to read. There are also 3 Path to Ascendancy books by 𝐒𝐮𝐲 that are claiming to come out in 2023. Now, I think the odds of this actually happening are about 0%. My guess is 1 book's going to come out. I don't know why Goodreads is claiming that 3 books are going to come out. You know, I think I know why, and that one of them was supposed to come out last year and it got delayed. And then he said 2 more are going to come out this year. So but just the odds of an author coming out with 3 books in the same year just seems so illogical to me. But I love 𝐒𝐮𝐲. I love everything Malazan. I think that he has very admirably taken this series in a different direction than Steven Erikson. I love the fact that he's not trying to do what Erikson does, and he's just kind of telling other stories in this world. In the Path to Ascendancy series, he's telling almost kind of a prequel story. It's not a prequel story because how do you tell a prequel story to an entire world? But it's a prequel story for some of the characters. And I've just been so enthralled with how good these books have been. Just truly wonderful. And I can't wait to keep on reading them. Then it's going to be The Burning, The Lord of Demons by Evan Winter. Another book that is not for sure coming out next year, but I keep on hearing that it is. I've loved the first 2 books in the series. This is, I don't know if it would be classified as like epic fantasy, although it probably is. It's very fun fantasy, but it's set in this like African-inspired world, which is very unique for me. Maybe there's like a lot of fantasy African type of books out there. I certainly don't know about them. I wish there were more because this one rocks. I am reluctantly going to be reading The Murderbot Diaries, book number 7 by Martha Wells. I am just kind of getting burnt out on Murderbot, but I think part of that reason was I read so many of them in a short time frame, and maybe giving me a break of like half a year or more between reading book number 6 and book number 7 will revive this series for me. Another one that I am super excited to read is The Sharded Few, book number 2 by Alec Hudson. This is a series that, again, not a ton of people know about. I don't even know how I found out about it. I think I was reading like a Reddit thread where somebody was talking about this new book coming out that's like a blend of epic fantasy and progression fantasy, 2 things that I love. I gave this book a high 5 out of 5. It's so good. And if I could say anything, like the thing it does the best is the magic system in here is one of the best that I've ever read in any series. I think the magic system is like better than Brandon Sanderson, and I love Brandon Sanderson magic systems. Read it for that alone and be surprised at how good the other things are. I also have in my possession Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. I don't think this book comes out until April, but I don't know why I got an arc so early on this book. I don't want to read it until it gets closer to the release date, because I don't want to put out a review like a half a year before the book comes out. But I love Fonda Lee. I've only read the Greenbone Saga. I don't know if she's written other things, but I am obsessed with the Greenbone Saga. And I know this book is going to be very, very different. I did listen to one review from the Obsessive Bookseller, another booktuber that I love her channel, and you should subscribe it. I'll link it down below. But she was saying really positive things about it. Some negative, but in general, pretty positive, but it feels very different from what I've already read, and I'm looking forward to it. And then finally, there is another Wandering Inn book coming out in 2023, maybe two, but I think there's one more that I have planned. I don't know. I think there should be two. I don't know why I have one on my list, but maybe Matt, you messed up, man. So the next category of books that I want to talk about is the Patreon picks. On my Patreon, I have an event every month where a Patreon people of a certain tier can put a book into a raffle. I will spin the raffle at the end of the month, and whoever wins, I will read and review that book. I do it once a month. There's 12 books, and I'm reading all 12. Who knows what they will be, but it won't be anything on this list, hopefully. Now, finally, these are my lower priority fantasy series. I'm going to read them, but it's just books that are not high up there, but I'm still excited. Mostly, I don't know anything about these, other than I trust people that I know that know good books that keep telling me to read all these books. The first is the 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐬𝐸 Saga. This is the one that I know the most about, because this is for sure the book that I have heard more people tell me that I need to read. There's 11 of them by David Gemmell, who has passed away, I don't even think recently, I think a while ago. And it's just like an epic fantasy, like a hero fantasy series. I keep hearing that if you love John Gwynne, you'll love the 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐬𝐸 Saga. I happen to love John Gwynne, and I'm hoping that I love the 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐬𝐸 Saga as well. Next on the list is The Sword of 𝐒𝐲𝐻𝐬, or 𝐒𝐲𝐻𝐬𝐸, not sure how to say it, I know how to read it, but it's a one-book series by M.L. Wang. I think there's more books in this series, but they're like totally different, and whenever anybody recommends the series to me, they just tell me to read this one. Another one that I have intentionally hidden myself from listening to anything about it, unanimously, people have told me this is wonderful. And that's not hyperbole. Unanimously. If you don't like this book, I'd love to hear it, because I'd love to hear a contrary opinion. I often have contrary opinions, but I am desperately hoping that that is not true here. Also, there is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. This is a 3-book series. I think it's 3 books. There might be like another series that attaches to this one later on, but this is by Tad Williams. This book is on my list because of Brian Lee Durfee, another booktuber and author that I equal parts love his books and his YouTube channel. And he said that this series is like one of the biggest inspirations for him to write The 5 Warrior Angels. And I am obsessed with The 5 Warrior Angels. So, Brian, I hope you are right on this one. Also is The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. And this is a book that I've heard very contrary opinions, kind of equal parts, people that hate it and people that think it's one of the best things they've ever read. I think this is kind of more like a political fantasy thriller that again, I work in politics. I love reading political type fantasy books. Maybe that's what this is. I can't super remember, because as soon as I heard people raving about this book, I shut myself off from learning anything about it. I want to go in blind, and I'm pretty optimistic that I'm going to like this one. Now, next up is the Mage Errant series. This is a 6-book series by John Bierce. This is when you look up like what are the top progression fantasy series, this always shows up near the top. That is why this is on the list. I also want to say that Travis Riddle, the author of 𝐒𝐲𝐬𝐬 that I talked about earlier, my one and only author interview I did with Travis, and he mentioned to me that John Bierce is like a friend of his and kind of a mentor of his on his books, and that's one of the reasons that it is up on this list so high. Then is Ash and Sand. This is by Richard Nell, and man, I've heard such positive things about this. The cover looks so like bright and sunny, but I've heard it's more of like a grimdark story. You know my thoughts already about grimdark, and I can't wait to read and devour the best of grimdark, which I think this book is. Then is a book that I'm feeling very reluctant about, and this is The Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker. I have heard very mixed things about this, but the Fantasy Network has raved about this series, and I very much trust his opinion on his thoughts on books, and I constantly have people telling me, Matt, if you love Malazan, you are going to love The Prince of Nothing. That makes me leery, because nothing in my mind will ever be as good as Malazan. So am I going to look at this as like a cheap Malazan knockoff, or am I going to look at it as a very worthy alternate series in that type of book? I'm hoping it's the latter. I am nervous, but I am jumping into this 3-book series. Now is Arcane Ascension, and basically everything that I just told you about Mage Errant, copy and paste that here. Everyone talks highly about this in the progression fantasy world. This is by Andrew Rowe, another 3-book series, and we'll see. I love everything progression fantasy so far. Let's hope this continues into 2023. We're getting close to the end here, and next is Sons of Darkness. This is the first book in the Rag of Rata, RTA. I don't know how to say that, but this is an Indian-inspired fantasy book. I've never read anything that claims to be that. This is by Gaurav Mohanty. I messed that one up. I'm sorry, Gaurav. But yeah, again, don't know anything about it. I know Patrick Leo talked highly about this, and I very much align with a lot of things that Patrick has to say, so I'm hoping for good things here. Then is The Nevernight Chronicle by Jay Kristoff. The only reason I am reading this is because the other Jay Kristoff book that I read, Empire the Vampire, I loved. So I'm giving him a chance on his other series that he's already put out, that came out before Empire the Vampire. Then is The Wounded Kingdom. This is by R.J. Barker, a 3-book series, and another copy and paste. I love R.J. Barker. I trust that his original series was not good because of its setting, but good because of the writer of R.J. Barker. And R.J., I'm reading all of your stuff. Back down to the final 3. Next is The Dark Tower. This is by Stephen King and is a 7-book series. I am somewhat confident that I'm probably going to drop off this series at some point because I've heard so many mixed things. People tell me, like, the most positive things people say about this are that it's different. I know Mike from Mike's Book Reviews talks highly about this, but it just feels like I'm not going to like it. It's rated super high in the fantasy community. Everyone talks about this as like kind of like a top 10, top 20 series. Everyone loves Stephen King. The only Stephen King book that I've ever read, I just reviewed recently. I will put a link up top so you can check that out. But that was 11/22/63, and I was not a big fan of that book. Now, Stephen King's written about 1 million books. He's one of the most popular authors of all time, maybe the most popular author of all time. And maybe I will turn into a big Stephen King fan because of this book and The Stand, which I am going to be also reading this year. So then is The Justice of Kings. This is the first book in The Empire of the Wolf by Richard Swan. And I don't know anything about this, other than I've heard very mixed things. But A lot of people talk highly about this, and I had to include it, even though I know nothing about it. I just remembered, I think I messed up and I didn't mention The Stand earlier on, but I am going to be doing The Stand by Stephen King. It's enormous. I'm nervous about it. My brother recommended it to me, and he doesn't really read fantasy books very often at all. He said it's awesome. I trust his opinion on things, and I am giving it a chance for him. Then finally, the last series on this list is The Sun Eater by Christopher Ruccio. This is a 4-book series. I have heard a lot of good things about this series, namely from Theo on Rekindled Reader and Alex at Tall Guy Reads. I know they've been going through this series and they've said very positive things, and they've made me very hyped up about reading this. So I am very much looking forward to that. So that wraps it up for me. Those are the 103. I think there's actually 104. I think I miscounted. I think there's 2 𝐒𝐤𝐬 books when on my list only counted 1. But these are the 104 books that I very much anticipate reading. Again, probably 90% of these will get read, which is a large amount. And I hope that you stick around to watch my reviews of all of these books, and I will review every single one of them, whether you want me to or not. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thank you again to my patrons, and a special shout out to my Ascendant tier patrons, Danute, Sky, Russell, and Ron Reich.